The protagonist, Mungryong, is shopping with his sister, an ordinary outing meant to introduce her new boyfriend. The air was light, filled with idle chatter, when suddenly Mungryong's phone rang. At the same moment, his sister also received a call. After a brief conversation, her expression shifted, and she hurriedly told Mungryong that she had to leave. She instructed him to head home. As Mungryong began his walk back, he encountered an elderly woman on the street. Her weathered face bore a look of concern as she warned him that wicked men had been seen heading toward his house. Mungryong, brushing it off as nothing more than a harmless word, continued on his way. But moments later, his phone buzzed again, and this time it from an unknown number. His heart skipped when he realized it was his sister on the line, her voice urgent. She directed him not to go home, telling him to come to an address she would send shortly. Confusion gnawed at him, but before Mungryong could process the situation, a chilling realization dawned: someone was already in his house. As he approached, an unfamiliar, imposing man appeared, his size alone making Mungryong's pulse quicken. The stranger locked eyes with him and asked directly if he was Mungryong. Fear creeping into his voice, the protagonist denied it, hoping to escape unnoticed. But before he could turn away, a voice from the shadows, someone familiar with him, called his name, therefore confirming his identity. Meanwhile, elsewhere, a man received word that they had finally caught Mungryong. The protagonist, Mungryong, awoke abruptly, the cold splash of water jarring him into consciousness. His wrists were bound tightly, and as his vision cleared, he was met with the unsettling sight of 3 identical faces staring down at him. Mungryong smirked through the pain and sarcastically asked if they were the 3 little pigs. His remark earned him a swift slap from one of the men, the sting sharp across his cheek. The questioning began immediately. They demanded to know the whereabouts of his sister. Mungryong, however, repeated the same answer, which was he didn't know. He truly didn't know where his sister was. As the beating intensified, another man intervened, ordering the attacker to stop, reminding him that their big boss would be arriving soon. Elsewhere, Jiha, the notorious big boss, met with his sister after receiving a cryptic message. His expression was grim as he revealed the news that they had captured the brother of the woman who had been involved in an affair with her husband. Back in captivity, Mungryong seized a rare moment of opportunity. He had quietly freed himself and bolted, running as fast as he could through the building. His escape led him to a rooftop, where he was quickly cornered by his captors. Out of breath and out of options, Mungryong realized that he was their key to luring his sister out of hiding. Unwilling to endure another round of beatings, he made a split-second decision. He leaped from the rooftop, choosing the uncertain fall over the certainty of capture. He landed hard on the roof of the neighboring building, barely feeling the impact as adrenaline coursed through his veins. Without stopping, he broke into a sprint, desperate to escape the men who had cornered him. As he tore through the narrow streets below, fate played its cruel hand. Out of nowhere, a car slammed into him, sending him sprawling to the ground. Dazed and disoriented, Mungryong blinked up at the vehicle. The passenger's door opened, and stepping out was none other than Jiha, the big boss himself. His cold eyes locked onto Mungryong as he approached, but before Jiha could speak, Mungryong lunged forward, sinking his teeth into the boss's ear, giving him just enough time to scramble to his feet and bolt down the street once more. Enraged, Jiha shouted to his men, "If you find him, kill him on the spot." Meanwhile, in a quiet, secluded temple, Prosecutor, Mungryong's friend, was with a sister monk. The worry on his face was evident as he confessed, "It's been days, and I've heard nothing from Mungryong. Something's wrong." Flashbacks recalled Prosecutor visiting Mungryong in a cold detention center years earlier. Prosecutor was also there the day Mungryong was released, sharing in the brief moment of relief. Back in the present, Mungryong found himself in the cramped shop of an ex-boyfriend. After collapsing in the mountains, a passing hiker had found him unconscious and brought him back to safety. As Mungryong recounted the ordeal, fear gnawed at him. He had no idea what to do next or how long he could keep running. But then something caught his eye. His ex-boyfriend had a taser, and without thinking twice, Mangryong snatched it up, gripping it tightly as if it were the only weapon that could keep him alive in the chaotic storm of his life. Big Boss Jiha climbed into his car, slamming the door shut with frustration still simmering from the night's events. But just as he settled into the driver's seat, a cold voice behind him shattered the silence. "I wouldn't move if I were you." Mangryong was there, lurking in the back seat, a knife glinting in his hand. But Jiha didn't even flinch. He didn't bat an eyelid, barely acknowledging the threat. His calm, deliberate silence only served to fuel Mangryong's irritation. Desperate for a reaction, Mangryong leaned in closer, his breath warm against Jiha's neck. Without warning, he ran his tongue across Jiha's skin. That got his attention. Jiha's eyes darkened with fury, but before he could retaliate, Mangryong struck. The taser buzzed, and Jiha became unconscious. When Jiha finally woke up, he found himself handcuffed to the frame of a bed in a room. The sting of humiliation hit him before the pain in his wrists. Across the room, Mangryong stood with his ex-boyfriend, who was holding up a camera, recording every moment. Jiha's jaw clenched as the realization hit him. He knew exactly what Mangryong intended to do. His voice cracked with fury. "Untie me, you bastard." Mangryong didn't respond. Instead, he moved closer, his gaze cold. Once finished, Mangryong tells Jiha to not even think about looking for his sister or for him, because if he did, the video would be everywhere. As Mangryong turned to leave, something caught his attention. He hesitated, glancing back at Jiha with a frown. "Do you have an older brother or a younger sibling? You seem familiar." Jiha's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. He didn't need to. Satisfied for the moment, Mangryong left the hotel room with his ex, leaving Jiha handcuffed and seething in silence. But as Mangryong disappeared from sight, Jiha's anger simmered, and a dark thought crossed his mind. The next time, he vowed, it will be my turn. Mangryong approached the store and knocked on the door, and after a moment, an employee answered. The man's face was a mix of concern and dread as he informed Mangryong that his ex-boyfriend had been kidnapped. Along with the grim news, they had left behind an address. Meanwhile, the ex-boyfriend was being beaten by the captors, who demanded to know where Mangryong was. A low rumble cut through the tense air as the sound of a motorbike drew near. Mangryong arrived at the scene, swinging off the bike with a baseball bat gripped firmly in his hand. His eyes locked onto the group of thugs, unflinching, and asked them to let his friend go unless they want their big boss to die of embarrassment. One of the men sneered, confident that Mangryong wouldn't survive the day. But Mangryong remained unfazed, and said, "I've already told my friend to spread the video if I don't return." The men initially dismissed his threat, claiming whatever was in the video wasn't their concern, and their boss didn't care. A dangerous smile tugged at the corner of Mangryong's lips and he said, "Really? Even when he was moaning under me?" The statement caused confusion among the group, as they whispered among themselves, trying to piece together what Mangryong meant by his comment. With a mocking grin, Mangryong added, "Your big boss really is big, is that why you call him that?" The joke struck a nerve, the leader's face flushed with rage, his patience snapping. He asked for Mangryong to be captured. Mangryong prepared to fight, tightening his grip on the bat, but a phone call interrupted the tension. After a brief conversation, the leader announced a change in plans. Mangryong would go with them, and his ex-boyfriend would be released, which Mangryong agreed to. As Mangryong was led down by the men, one of the men noticed his swollen eyes and asked what had happened. Mangryong, playing into the act, sighed dramatically and said he had seen his mother in a dream. For a brief moment, one of the men seemed to believe him, his face softening. But another quickly shot down the sentiment, recalling that Mangryong had been an orphan since birth. The truth hit them like a wave of awkward realization. Mangryong rolled his eyes, calling them idiots for not realizing the obvious. His face was swollen because they had beaten him senseless. As they approached the compound, a shot suddenly rang out from a nearby window. The bullet whizzed past Mangryong's face, grazing his cheek. He barely flinched, but blood trickled down his skin. Later, as Mangryong sits handcuffed in a chair, he asked what the big boss wanted to discuss with him. Jiha made it clear that he wasn't interested in asking about Mungryong's sister since he knew Mungryong wouldn't reveal her location anyway. What he really wanted was the phone used to film him. Mungryong chuckled at the demand, meeting Jiha's gaze with a smirk. "If that's all you want," he said, "give me your number, I'll airdrop it to you." His tone was mocking, clearly amused at Jiha's desperation. Jiha's eyes narrowed, his voice low and threatening. He asked Mungryong if he realized that he could be killed on the spot, but Mungryong, ever defiant, met the threat with a confidence. Intrigued by the challenge, tossed a set of keys toward him, signaling for the handcuffs to be unlocked. Mungryong, now free, rose to his feet and knelt in front of Jiha. With a smirk of dominance, Jiha grabbed a glass of liquor, pouring it over Mungryong's head. Jiha's grin widened, and he turned to the intruder, his voice dripping with cruel amusement. "How does it feel," Jiha asked, "to find the precious friend you were searching for?" Mungryong turned his head slightly, his gaze falling on the stunned face of his friend, Inspector Junyang, who stood frozen in disbelief at the scene before him.